All right, hello everybody. Welcome back to the Sifting, Reclaiming Authenticity, episode number 42. Don't listen. There's been a lot of episodes so far. Don't blame me if I have to take a look back. I was only the one that did that board right there. Is it looking more centered? Like the words?
I don't know. Did you move them?
No. I left them where they were.
So
It's
why
it's
would
all
it look
right.
more centered?
It's all right. No, I think my spatial awareness, I think it's fine. But Lindsay looked at it and she was like, "Oh, it's not quite centered." I'm like, "But it looks centered." You tell us. Does it look centered or not? Anyway, welcome back. This is the Sifting, Reclaiming Authenticity. My name is Jonah, and I get distracted easy. I am here with my wife, Lindsay. Lindsay, how's your day going?
Pretty good.
I know exactly how your day is going because we've spent all day together today. No, we've had a good day today. We went to church this morning. We got tzatziki's for lunch, so I'm feeling real good. We love tzatziki's. If you don't know what it is, it's like a Mediterranean restaurant. It's like a Greek place. It's more like a fast food place than anything else, but they've got what I like from there is the lamb gyro. I get the lamb gyro. Everything comes with chips, and then you can get like a second side. I usually get like this tomato cucumber pasta with feta in it, but today I got rice, and they brought it out. And I mean, you know this already, but the people listening don't know this. They brought this rice out, unless you've had the rice there. And I swear it just looked like white rice. And then Lindsay took a bite of it first, and she was like, "Wow, that is really good." And it was like, lemon, what would you say, like a lemon herb sort of rice? Yeah, something like that.
Tasted real buttery.
Real buttery. It was good rice. So, had tzatziki's. I got my lamb gyro. I'm feeling pretty good. Lindsay, did you like your lamb gyro?
Always.
And you like that tomato cucumber salad a lot. So yeah, we had our tzatziki's. And now we're here. We're recording, and I'm feeling good. We're talking about something that I love today, books. So I'm excited about doing this episode. I'm really looking forward to seeing where it goes. But first, this is episode 42. If you're listening for the first time, obviously I'm Jonah. This is Lindsay. We're a couple. We do this together. This is something that we do as a hobby together. We don't do this for a job. We don't make any money doing this. We do it because we like to sit down and have talks and have conversations about different things. And we post that online through the Sifting so that you guys can take part in that. We love engagement. And so we want you guys to engage with us, whether that be commenting, whether that be sharing. You can message the Sifting account directly, and we get all those messages. We're on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Spotify. Those last two are where the episodes usually are at. Yeah, we're on Spotify, but I think most people like to watch us on YouTube. So episodes go live every other Monday at 8 a.m. Yeah, and we are here for roughly an hour, sometimes give or take a little less, a little more. We've been going a little over, and I think that's probably my fault. I don't mind going over a little bit. Like, I don't want it to like push 2 hours or anything like that. Like, I want it to stay within that hour time frame. But yeah, like I think we've only had one episode that went like 40. Anyway, we had an episode that went like 45 minutes. We're roughly an hour or so here. We talk about anything and everything related to faith. We talk a lot about just Bible teaching and theology, different views and different opinions on things within the scriptures. We talk about church leadership. By no means we don't work in church leadership, but we've been around a lot, and I think by now we know a couple things about it. And we talk a lot about leadership, ministry, all sorts of different things. even personal growth, stuff like that. But we really try to keep everything within a Christian framework, and our whole goal here is about reclaiming authenticity. It's about really looking at, thinking, and discussing what it means to live through or to live with an authentic faith. That's kind of where the name The Sifting comes from. So if it's your first time listening to us, welcome. We're glad you're here. You've got 41 episodes to catch up on. So I hope that by the time you listen to the next one, you've memorized all the previous ones. But we have some great stuff we're going to talk about today, and we'll get into it in just a minute. But the day after we recorded the last episode, which, by the way, thank you for all the feedback on our episode back on counterculture. That was a great episode to record. That was a lot of fun to talk about. And we got some great feedback, some wonderful, kind words from people about how it affected them, about how it ministered to them. I think that's wonderful. I think that's amazing. That's all we want is for people to feel ministered to through this. We want it to be a discussion where people can engage with it, where people can ask questions about how it applies to them, ask questions about what it means in the context of their own life. So that's great. Thank you. But the day after we recorded the episode was the Super Bowl. And I didn't even make any comments about the Super Bowl last time. It just didn't cross my mind. I was too busy talking about Nate Bargatze, I guess. But it was the Super Bowl, and I'm a football fan, so I'll talk about it for just a second here before we get into it. So in short, I thought it was a spectacular game. I thought it was an unbelievable, probably one of the best games I've ever seen. Just amazing from first snap to the last. Even the first half, some people said was kind of boring. I don't agree with that really at all. I thought the game was absolutely fantastic. It was like the 7th longest in the history of the NFL, I think is what they said, which is a league that's been around for 100 years. So it was a very, very long game. I think everybody was ready to go home. But it was a phenomenal game. I don't hate the Chiefs as much as Lindsay does. I thought it was really cool that they won. They're a dynasty cementing themselves in sports history. So I think that's pretty incredible. But you have a grudge against the Chiefs. You're not into them. And it's not just because you're a Bengals fan. You specifically don't like Travis Kelce. Is that it?
Yeah, I can't stand Travis Kelce.
You don't like Travis Kelce. I've never been like really bothered by
Patrick
him.
Mahomes is annoying, but not nearly as bad as Travis Kelce.
It's so the Taylor Swift stuff this year was so funny. Like I didn't have a problem at all with it really. Like it's just, celebrities dating, and of course they're going to show each other and whatnot. But like, I saw this meme on Facebook, and it said it was a meme of I don't know if anyone has seen Breaking Bad, but there's this scene in Breaking Bad where the main character Walter is lying in his basement and he's just laughing like a madman, and the meme said Swifties watching their team win the Super Bowl in their first ever year of watching football, while I've been waiting my entire life for my team to win the Super Bowl. And it was Walter White just laughing maniacally. So I thought the game was awesome. The 49ers played an unbelievable game. I mean, one of the best losing efforts I've ever seen from a team. I've never seen a team put an effort like that on the field and lose before. They ran into Patrick Mahomes, and that's what happens to a lot of teams. And they really put together an unbelievable effort. But the game was awesome, and as a football fan, it made me happy to watch such an amazing game. I know that it made a lot of people mad. And the Chiefs winning, like, spoiled the experience for a lot of people. And it just didn't for me. I just don't share the hate for Kansas City like a lot of people do. But anyway, that's beside the point. What kind of drink do you have here today again? It's a chai? Should I hold that up so everyone can see it?
Why?
It's a chai. You got a very cool Legend of Zelda cup. What are the... Is that boba in the bottom of it?
Yeah.
I can't get over the look of boba. It looks so weird.
It
Yeah.
kind of does look like fish eggs.
It does. I'm telling you. Okay. All right, 10 minutes. We got to get to the content of this episode. But yeah, Super Bowl was awesome. I enjoyed it thoroughly. So if you're looking for my football update, that was it. Okay. This episode is a little bit different in that I really wanted to talk about something that I engaged with recently that was very impactful on me and very enlightening, and it ministered a lot to me. This episode is called Shades of Grace, and I named it that. Don't laugh. I named it that because, oh gosh, it's an inside joke. I named it that because grace is really the theme of what I want to talk about here today, what we want to talk about. So I read this book. It's called Where the Light Fell by an author named Philip Yancey. Lindsay got me this book for Christmas, so thanks, Lindsay. I appreciate it very much. You gave me a wonderful, wonderful gift in this book. And I mean, I'm sure if you've listened for a while, you've probably picked up on this. I love to read. I love reading. It's my favorite hobby. I read nonfiction. I read fiction. I read all sorts of subgenres in between that. Obviously, I enjoy reading in the nonfiction category, things like theology. I like reading history, philosophy, memoirs, which is what this is. As far as like fiction goes, I love reading fantasy, sci-fi, thrillers, and mystery. I love all sorts of stuff. And I find value in a lot of different material. And I love reading because it opens me up into different viewpoints and different worldviews. So when I read Where the Light Fell, it shows me the story of a young man who had a crisis of faith because of situations and incidents that happened in his life in the 1950s and 60s, and how he really came out of that, and how he ended up fulfilling and seeing. He's still alive. I'm talking like he's passed away, but how he has really ended up seeing the goodness of God and the promise of God in his own life, and the long, hard road that it was to get there, the painful road that it was to get there. And I'm seeing a lot of like my own story in his life, even though my circumstances and my life trajectory has been very different than Philip Yancey's. I see a lot of my own self in him. And so I don't know if you can hear that. Nutmeg is snoring so loud right now. She's on the bed right over here like she always is. And she is napping hard right now. That is so cute. She's so cute. Our dogs both are amazing. Yeah, we have two dogs, by the way, Toffee and Nutmeg, if you've not heard us talk about them before. But anyway, where was I at? Yeah, so this book really ministered to me because it taught me a lot about myself. And that's what I love about reading. I didn't live in the 50s and the 60s, but Philip Yancey did. And by me reading his words, it's not the exact same thing as me being there, but it helps me understand what it was like to live in that time. And that's what I love about reading, is we get to go into a different viewpoint every time we pick up a book. We get to go into a different world where we learn different things, whether that's the world of a person who lived, or if it's Middle Earth, like I'm reading Lord of the Rings right now. And there's so much value in going into a world that Tolkien spent his entire life making. It was a life's work, him making this, making this world of Middle Earth, and you go into it and you can see the different factions, and you can see the different geography and the characters and the impacts that the world is having on each other, and the languages that Tolkien developed. And all of this stuff is just so fascinating to interact with for me. So I see value in everything that I read. And this book especially was just so powerful to me. Philip Yancey is one of my favorite nonfiction authors. He wrote a book called What's So Amazing About Grace? Now, I have not read the entirety of that book. I've read parts of it. I have it on my bookshelf in the other room. And I'm very eager to get back to it after reading the entirety of this. But he's one of my favorite nonfiction authors. And I feel like I've learned so much from him that I haven't learned from kind of your standard Christian theology, or your standard books that are written by like preachers or pastors or whatever. Not that those are bad. Those have a lot of value to them. But I've not read anything like this. And he has a voice to speak to people in a very gifted and a very beautiful way, I think. And so this was just a fantastic read. I'm also really into memoirs. So like memoirs, the stories of people that have not died. They are books that are written by the person telling the story of their life. I know that Beth Moore has a memoir that I really want to read, that I'm interested in. And I also bought another one that I have yet to read called Educated. I think her name is Tara Westover. So I'm really looking forward to that, because if you know anything about that book, it's the story of how she overcame the family that she grew up in, and how she went on to pursue an education despite the religious circumstances that her family had placed. It's super interesting from what I've heard, so I'm looking forward to reading that. But just right off the bat, before we get too deep into it, I definitely recommend this to everybody. Yancey's not a hard author to read. He's very down to earth. He does not use big flowery language. He very much is a layperson kind of reader, and that just about anybody can read this. There's a lot of pretty mature stuff in it. He doesn't shy away from getting into the gritty details of what his life was like and the kinds of things he's experienced. So there's some of that in there, but man, it just all goes together into building this image and this picture of grace and of how God works in our life. And that's what I really want to get into talking about a lot. Go ahead.
Yeah. If you're not much of a reader, I'm kind of in between. Like,
yeah,
I can read a book pretty fast, but I don't pick them up as often as you do. But if you're not much of a reader, Carrie Newhoff has a really good podcast episode with Philip Yancey that, yeah, I really enjoyed. So, yeah, that content with him, very good also.
Absolutely. Yeah. Another shout out to Carrie Newhoff. That's a guy that we like a lot on here, so we talk about him a lot. But yeah, he has a couple episodes, I think, with Philip Yancey, I believe. I think there's 2 or 3. There's one for sure that they did when this book came out, which I think was where you got the idea to get this for me. But yeah, anyway, those are some great episodes, so thank you for that. I kind of feel like, I sort of feel like when it comes to nonfiction, it's about information being obtained by you and retained by you. For some people, that's like opening up a book and like physically reading it is not retainable for them. I know people who they receive information and they retain it, but like opening a book, is not how that happens for them. Like listening to something is how that happens for them. I think there could be people who listen to this that never read, and it's just not something that maybe they don't have time for. Maybe it's something that they just don't comprehend when they read a book, or it's difficult for them to understand. But this format here, this sort of podcast, for them might be highly retainable. And so I think it's just depending upon knowing you and how your brain works, how you function, how you retain information. So stuff like the Carrie Newhoff podcast, I view that as just as valuable as reading, because it is another way of like getting a hold of useful information, and a lot of people retain it when they hear it audibly. That's why some people listen to audiobooks over physical books. It's just a means of getting information and learning how you best process that. So yeah, absolutely. Even if you're not a reader, I mean, there's so many ways to getting information, to getting teaching about the Bible. There's so much that's out there, so many different ways to engage with this stuff. So yeah, absolutely. Thank you for mentioning that, Lindsay. Okay. You have anything else you want to say before we go any further? No? Cool. So this book is about the life story of Philip Yancey. And I don't want to give too much of it away if you have kind of heard my spiel here and it is something that you're interested in reading. I don't want to spoil the experience of reading it for you. So I won't get too deep into specifics. I'll talk about some. I want to pinpoint a couple things that were really impactful for me.
I haven't read it, so I'm mostly just going to sit here and try not to look dumb.
No, that's true. I mean, it's true that you haven't read it. I gotta be careful with my words. Like, that's so funny. We talk all the time about words, how we speak to each other. Yeah. So there's a couple points that I want to kind of hone in on that I really enjoyed about this. But I definitely don't want to give everything away. I really want you to go and get the book yourself. And I'm not trying to sell it to you. I'm not being paid to say that at all. It's not very expensive. It'll take you, I don't know, maybe 2-3 weeks, maybe a month to read. I think it took me 2.5 weeks to read this. It's not very long. So a couple things that I thought were really interesting. He starts this book as a child. Well, actually, no. He starts it when he's, I would say, like late 20s, early 30s, maybe around that. Young adult kind of area of life. And what's interesting is he starts this book by bringing us into a living room with him and his wife and several family members and his mom. And he finds out in this moment, just a family moment where they're all sitting together, he finds out that everything he knew about his dad's death was wrong. And he finds this by complete accident through a newspaper clipping that falls out of a book. He finds out that his dad, well, to give some backstory to who his dad was, he was a Baptist minister, I want to say. And his dad ended up catching polio. Obviously, a product of that time that his dad lived. His dad had polio, and he was bedridden. And he was put in something called, I believe they called it an iron lung. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about, right? An iron lung. So he was completely suffocated in this thing. And this was the day where they didn't have any podcasts. They had no phones. He couldn't do anything except stare at the ceiling. And he had made the decision to leave the hospital on a claim of faith that God was going to heal him. They believed that the power of God exceeded the power of doctors, and that if he left the hospital, he would be healed because there were enough people praying for him. His wife, which was Philip's mom, had a lot of people in her home church and then their church that they pastored praying for him, and he believed that it was impossible for him to not be healed. So he made the decision to leave the hospital, a very dangerous, risky move. And he made this decision against medical guidance. The doctors had said, "We really think this is a bad idea. We would advise that you stay here. We don't think this is right. We don't know how long you have if you choose to leave." And he made the decision to leave. And I think it was either 2 weeks or 2 months later, he was dead. And this was hidden from Philip.
Probably 2 weeks if he was in an iron lung.
Yeah, it probably was 2 weeks. This was hidden from Philip, and the full story was never really told to him. And when he found this out, it shattered his world. And it shattered his image of so many different things. What healing looks like, the power of God, his own family, his own family's claim and faith. So many different things just kind of came to the surface for him and really were shaken deeply. And then he transports us from that moment all the way back to his childhood. So he takes us back to his childhood. And this was one of the sections of the book that I loved the most, because he talks about things that are engaging for kids. And he talks about things that he remembers as a child, obviously things that only kids would remember. And I think the it was also one of the saddest parts of the book because he talks a lot about several animals that he had that died. There was one. I'm so sorry if you love cats, but should I say? Oh, I guess I have to now. They had a pet cat when they were little, who I forget this cat's name, but it was small. It was like a kitten, and they got this kitten, and they set this kitten out in the yard on Easter Sunday, and out of nowhere, the neighbor's dog, like a big pit bull or something, came over and like strangled the kitten to death. And they couldn't do anything. They were all out there with it, but they couldn't react in time. And this kitten died. And then there was another story about a little dog that died, and then another dog that they had to abandon. So it was deeply traumatic for a kid, as would, any situation like that with an animal. And he talks a lot more about things that happened as a kid. And really, this whole section of the book was, it was revealing to me how our upbringing forms us and how our upbringing affects us into our future and into the rest of our life. So not only does he go through his childhood, but he goes through kind of his teenage years. And obviously, a formative part of his life was church, because his family was, his parents were ministers. And so the kind of era that Philip grew up in was one of, I would call it extreme Southern fundamentalism. I mean, this is about as extreme fundamentalism as you can think of. And he grew up in this. So he talks a lot about the curse of Ham, which I know that you've talked a little bit about. Say, what is that again for like people that may not have listened to the last episode? What did you define the curse of Ham as?
I don't know some of the details, but it was the idea that Moses' son Ham,
right,
was like cursed by God, and that the descendants of Ham who were still considered cursed by people who held to this theology were the descendants of Ham were like people of color,
Yeah.
and that they believed in segregation and were racist because they believed that like black people and people of color had this curse of Ham on them.
Yeah, absolutely. So like that was something he was taught in Sunday school as a kid. He was taught about, honestly, like active racism towards towards black people. They were taught, the whole KJV only kind of stuff. He grew up in the thick of this and deeply in the middle of all of this. Also, with the death of his father, he grew up in a single parent household. So not only was church and that unhealthy extreme fundamentalism formative for him, but his family life was formative, which was equally as negative. His mom, there was a really interesting passage in this about his mom, who was overall an awful person, just to be like totally honest. And his mom had a dream when she was young that she wanted to be a missionary to Africa. And that was like eventually going to be what she wanted to do. And that was what she really felt called to do. And after Philip's dad died, all of that just went out the window. And so she is carrying around a lot of, I don't know if you would call it guilt. She's carrying around a lot of shame about this, a lot of regret, a lot of anger, many different emotions. And what she does to Philip and his brother is she tells them one day the story of Hannah in the Bible, who dedicated her sons to God. And she tells Philip and his brother Marshall, she says, "This is what I'm doing today. I'm dedicating you both to God. And you are going to pick up the mantle that I couldn't carry. You are going to be the ones that go to Africa and that be missionaries. And you're going to do the dream that I always had." And this completely scars young Philip. And that talk that he had with his mother that day ended up affecting him his entire life. And not until he's well into adulthood is he able to even come back to that passage, because it was such a deeply scarring moment for him. In that moment, somebody else is defining his life for him. Someone else is setting an expectation on him. Somebody else is making it known what they want him to do. But the worst part of it all is that she's using spiritual language to try and manipulate him. And she's using spiritual language to try and set an unhealthy expectation on him. And it's not until he gets older that he goes back to that section, that passage about Hannah and her sons, and he realizes in that moment that God gave the call to Hannah's sons, and that he had lived his entire life bound by this expectation of his mother. And it wasn't until much later in life that he realized that his mother had no right to speak that over him, and his mother had no right to do that to him. And so he, becomes free from that. But it's just another image of how this book really shows me how our childhoods end up coming back to affect us, and how they form us in deep ways that we may not even realize until years and years later. We go through things as children, and I'm no psychologist, but we go through things that are traumatic. We go through things that are formative. May not be traumatic, but they are formative. We go through things that are shaping our reality, and they're shaping our viewpoint on many different things. and how that comes back to us later in life can manifest in a lot of different ways. For instance, I like, who was it? Somebody I know had a teacher tell them in elementary school that they just couldn't draw. Like, there was an art teacher and it was like second grade, and they were like, sweetie, you just can't draw. And that like followed them and haunted them for years and years and years, because that teacher said you can't draw. But the messages that the receiver was given went far deeper than just drawing. They heard, "Oh, I'm not good enough for all these people. I can't keep up with all these people. I don't have what it takes. I don't have that kind of greatness in me." And so that followed them for years and years and years. And it affected them in like all sorts of different areas of their life, until they had to confront that, and they had to deal with that, and they had to seek healing for that. But it's just an image of how many things are forming us from our childhood into our adulthood that we may not even realize. And so much of Philip's story is him trying to heal from things that happened to him as a child. Hurts that he experienced in church, lies he experienced in church, lies and hurt that he experienced in his home. And his life has been a continual healing process from all of these things. A really interesting, a really interesting story from this was that during kind of at the beginning of the civil rights movement, his church had a meeting because there was a young black man from a local seminary that wanted to attend church there. And that was completely unheard of at the time. And they went into a meeting and they said, no, this young man cannot be a part of our congregation. That young man ended up being Tony Evans, who today you've probably heard on the radio preaching. And I think about what he could have added to that church, and I think about what he could have been to that church body. But they were held back by something so deeply, deeply unhealthy. Tony Evans ended up being rejected by the church, and then still went on to overcome that rejection and become the incredible minister and the speaker and the preacher that he is today, who's influenced millions of people. But Philip, as a young person, experiences this, and he eventually, in I think it was high school, he was super, super interested in science. He was a lot like high school Lindsay, I think. Had a passion and a love for science. And of course, this created a lot of tension with his church community, because of course they don't believe that God and science can exist together, but he loved it. And he went to do some sort of summer program at a university, or some sort of lab. And he's like 16 years old, and he walks in, and they say, "Hello, we'd like you to meet one of our leading researchers." And he walks in, and it was a black man. And he sees the success, and he sees the position that this man holds, and immediately the thought that goes through his mind is, what else has my church lied to me about? And it was a moment for him that he faced something that had been going into him for years and years. And he said, I've got to overcome this, because there are things that have been taught to me that are not true. And he had to heal from those things and find out what the truth actually was. And so that to me was one of the main themes of this book. It was about how we're formed, how that comes back to affect us and our lives today, how there's a need for emotional healing, how there's a need for mental healing in many different ways from things that we don't even know have affected us. I think about things that may have affected me in my childhood. It made me think about things that I was told. It made me think about things that I've experienced that have affected me today. And usually those moments stick out to me like that. And I can say, that moment when I was 15 is so deeply embedded in my memory. I can remember everything about it, and I wonder how it's forming me today. And I have to make the decision if I want it to form me negatively or positively. So there's so much that goes into that, and it's such a powerful element of both faith and psychology. I think looking at the ways we're formed, looking at our families of origin, and really learning how that affects us. Okay, I need some water. Lindsay, do you have anything that you want to add to that? Just anything at all?
No.
That's okay. So
I just like to make a note that we both have very good parents and families.
Absolutely.
And childhoods.
Absolutely.
So
yeah.
We're not talking about like anything like wild and scarring came from our home lives. But, it's about like, even if you haven't had a really hard home life or super bad situation, like there are little things kind of sprinkled along the way of your life that affect you more than you realize in the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think too, obviously everything is rooted at home, but also for kids, school and church and like our faith community are deeply formative places for them. I think you, for instance, you've been in worship ministry for 15 years, and a lot of those years were formative for you. And so you weren't just formed by what was happening at home, which was, for you in your case, thankfully, was healthy. You were also formed by experiences that you had at church. And I think that's the case for a lot of kids that are growing up in church as well. If you have parents that are hopefully faithful, are hopefully taking you to kids' church, VBS, youth group, any of those things, those experiences are powerful as well. And school. Obviously, kids spend as much time at school as they do at home during some of those adolescent years. And so what they're experiencing at school is important because that is also forming them. Sadly, in a lot of negative ways for lots of kids and positive ways for others. So yeah, there's all sorts of things that go to forming us that we don't even realize. Just a couple other things that I liked about this. He talked a lot about growing up in a trailer home. There was a period of time where they just didn't have a lot of money anymore, so they had to move to a trailer home. And the experiences he had with some of the kids there, and exploring and really discovering a love for nature, and a love for reading. He talks a lot about what it was like growing up in the South, growing up in a Southern culture, what it was like seeing major world events, different elements of history through the lens of Southern America, which was really, really great. I loved learning about that. Talks a lot about his mom, his very challenging and difficult relationship with his mom. Obviously, a whole lot about church, high school, college, so many different experiences that he has there, and definitely a highlight for me was his stories about his brother Marshall. So his brother was this. His brother had a gift for the piano, and it was like they both tried playing instruments, but Marshall was really the one that excelled more often than Philip at that. It was very natural for him. It was a language that he understood very easily, and so his brother, his brother really became ingrained in music and had a passion for that. And he watched him succeed while Philip was not, succeeding in the way that we think and the way that he thought he should be. But there came a point where like all of that changed, and Marshall, his brother, really started being negatively affected by the forces that they grew up with. And he went off the rails, and he was going to a Christian college studying to be a music minister, just supremely gifted and talented, and had a heart for worship ministry, and all of that was just gone one day, and he completely went the other direction, into a very dark, deadly path. Whereas Philip, who has been struggling and who has been closing himself off against faith for most of his life because of his experiences, he gets saved in like a Bible study that he had with a few kids from college, and his life trajectory goes the other way. And so it was really interesting reading about how both of their lives were moving in opposite directions. But as they were moving in opposite directions, somehow they found each other, and it's like they switched. So like Philip was far away from faith, while Marshall was really finding his stride in faith. And then they hit a point where Marshall just completely went the opposite direction, didn't want anything to do with it anymore, and deeply, deeply went off the rails. And Philip found his own faith and was able to find success in his career after that and whatnot. So I really, really loved that part, reading about his relationship with his brother, their relationship with their mother. There was one heated scene that they had, a heated argument, that really, I think, was the trajectory changing moment for Marshall, when their mother like disapproved of the school he was going to go to. And I think it was that his mother told him that she hoped God was going to kill him because of the different college that he wanted to go to. I think this college he wanted to transfer to wasn't a Christian college. And so his mother was like, "Hey, I hope God kills you." And he's like, "Oh, that's not cool. I definitely don't want that to happen." And that was like the moment that just changed everything for him in the negative way. So I loved reading about that. But really, the best part of this book for me was hearing everything that Philip had went through in his life and how he's come out on the other side of that, and how he can see in retrospect the hand of God through all of it. And it was so encouraging to me, and it ministered so much to my spirit, because no matter what we go through, no matter what we face, no matter what challenges come to us, no matter what hand we've been dealt, God is always working in our life. And God is always working, and he's writing a story. And what we get confused about is we find ourselves in the middle of a single chapter, and we don't yet see the end of the story. And when we're at the end of the story, then we can look back and we can see, tying this into the whole book thing, you ever get to the end of a good book and you look back and you can see the different threads that have been weaving all throughout the book. So like you see how There were seeds of this plot twist early, or there were moments early where there was something that foreshadowed something else at the end of the book, and you can see how it all makes sense now. And that's kind of what happens in Philip's life, is he's gotten to a point now where he can see everything that's happened, where he can see the hand of God that's been moving throughout all of these situations that he's been through. And it ministers to me because, you know, I think about seasons that I've gone through. I think about seasons that I'm in right now. And, you know, there's good and there's bad in every season. But we often don't realize that while we're in it. We have to come out of it, and we have to come to the end of it to be able to see the whole picture. Like, have you ever gone through something that you, like, wouldn't have chosen to go through, but you look back and you say, man, I'm thankful and I'm glad that I went through that, because it taught me something, because it led me to somewhere, or it led me to someone that ended up being a major point in my life and a major, you know, formation to me. And I think that this book is really just a picture of that, and it's a reminder of that. You know, my favorite quote from any Christian leader is from a preacher named Charles Spurgeon, who was a Baptist minister, I think. I believe he was Baptist. Well, actually, he was all sorts of things, really. He was we'll call him an English minister in the late 1800s, I think it was, early 1900s. But my favorite quote comes from him, and he says, when you can't trace God's hand, trust God's heart. And that's something that I lean on more and more as my life goes on. And it's something that I know you've heard me talk about 100 times probably. You know, when we can't figure out what God is doing, when we're in a difficult season and we're saying, why am I going through this? I shouldn't be going through this. It's not fair. It hurts. It's painful. I'm confused. I don't know where I'm going. I don't know what I'm doing. When we have those moments, it's very tempting for us to blame God in a way, because we don't understand what he's doing, and we think that we should understand what God is doing. But God operates in a system and on a level that we sometimes just cannot comprehend. And he works in a way that we won't understand all the time, and that we can't expect to understand all the time. In retrospect, we might understand. Or in retrospect, maybe we won't ever have an explanation for why things were the way they were, or why things are the way that they are. But in the middle of all of that, there is something we can lean on. And it's God's heart. So when I'm going through a season where it's challenging, where it's difficult, I have to lean into God's heart, not the way I think that God's hand should be moving. So I trust and believe that God is good, that God loves me, that God cares for me, and that his will is for me to prosper, and his will is for me to succeed, and his will is for me to have fullness in my life and not emptiness. His will is not for me to be sick. It's not for me to be miserable. It's not for me to be depressed or anxious. I might feel those things in my season that I'm in, but ultimately God's heart for me is for much more than that. And so I think when we lean into God's heart, we approach God not with an accusatory attitude, but we approach God with a worshipful attitude, saying, I don't understand all the things that I'm going through, but I trust your heart for me, and I choose to worship because I know your heart. And I think when we choose to approach God that way, we really start to take on a perspective that's going to allow us to move forward with success and with a healthy faith. And this whole book is a theme of grace. It's a theme of forgiveness, remembering, healing, healing through trauma, healing through childhood events that have formed us. And it's powerful. So I really recommend it. I don't want to get, like I said, I don't want to get too into the weeds, because I really want you to read it. I want you to go and see yourself in his shoes, see a picture of your life and the way that it looks compared to yours. But it's something I highly recommend, and it's encouraging in the way that it shows us just how God moves. When I think about, there's this phrase that like Pentecostals will use a lot called the move of the Spirit, the move of God. And typically when we use that phrase, we're talking about a moment during the worship service where where it's particularly powerful, which is, I would agree, is a move of God. However, the move of the Spirit it's so much more than just that. If that's all it was, that would be great. But I think when we think of the move of the Spirit, I think way more about a moment in a service. I think about way more than a moment in a service. I think about our lives, and I think about the way the Spirit is moving through our everyday life, through the things that we do, through the people we encounter, through the situations that we go through, and how he's weaving together like this beautiful tapestry. And we can trust and know that God is moving in every day and in everything. And by the end of our life, there's going to be a beautiful tapestry that we have to look at. And that's because the Spirit was moving the entire time. And we have something to look back on. It might be at the end of the season. It might be at the end of a life. But we can look back and be thankful for how God moved, for how the Spirit moved on us and through us and with us and in us. Okay, Lindsay, do you have any closing comments?
Just talking about the moving of God being more than just, those like mountaintop moments, I guess you would call them. It kind of makes me think of, talking about like trying to look at your life as like a book or a story and seeing what God is doing in different moments. It's when you look at books and movies and shows, we see highlights. We see like wacky situations. I know that you're talking about Lord of the Rings, and you're like, yeah, I read for like 20 minutes about them walking up this hill.
Legit.
And like that's kind of thing isn't in a lot of books and movies, because we're so bored with the normal everyday in between those big moments that we would consider like highlighting in our story, whether you see that as like a book, a movie, but God is so invested in your story that like he wrote out and pays attention to each of those moments too. Not just the ones we would consider worthy or that we would put a label on it as a move of the Spirit or a move of God. He's moving in all of them. And I think it would do good for us to recognize his hand in the little moments, I guess.
Oh, that's beautifully said. Like, we talk so much about God being a big God, which I love and which I think is right. But he's just as much the God of the little as he is the God of the big. And like, I think when we realize that God is in our day-to-day life, like I can be a pretty boring person. Like, sometimes I have days where just nothing interesting is going on. And I think to myself, like, wow, that was a boring day. Nothing really happened. But my faith should speak and say, God was moving in today. And God had a purpose in today. And there is a purpose of its own day. And then there's a greater purpose that it's serving as well. And so I think a lot about the God of the little moments as well as the God of the big moments. That's beautifully said. Yeah. You have anything else?
No.
No? Okay. Cool. Well, guys, I appreciate y'all coming to hear us talk about this today.
Coming to YouTube.
Coming to YouTube. Yeah, thanks for reserving your spot on YouTube to talk with us today. Gosh, this was a great day. I get to talk about books and football. Like, what an awesome episode. I love that. But yeah, I recommend this book, and I just wanted to take an episode here today to talk to you about it, talk about how it impacted me. I could go on for probably 2 more hours about different stuff, but I don't want to give too much of it away. I want people to go and read it, and I want people to see the value in it and how it applies to them. So, Lord, we thank you for this time today. Thank you, Lord, for your grace. Thank you, God, that there's grace in every day. Sometimes we go through days, sometimes we go through weeks or months or even years that we would have not chosen to go through. Times of waiting, times of disappointment, times of pain and suffering. But you have a purpose within all of that. And help us to see through faith what it is that you're doing. Even if we can't understand how you're moving, even if we can't understand why things are the way that they are, we just pray, Lord, that we'd be able to trust your heart. Help us to know who you are, because in the hard moments, we have to lean on who you are. We have to be strong, and we have to have a foundation in Jesus. We have to have a foundation in the heart of the Lord. And when we do that, I really believe, God, that you set us up for success. You set us up for great testimonies. You set us up for great and mighty works that we can do in our families and in our lives, in our workplaces, wherever we are. And so, God, we thank you for this book. Thanks for the ministry of Philip Yancey and what it means to me, what it means to so many people. And I just pray that the people listening today would be encouraged and be ministered to through this, and that they walk away thinking about something or questioning something, or really being enriched by something they heard. So we thank you, Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Guys, thanks so much for thanks for coming here today. Thank you for joining us for another episode. We appreciate everybody who likes, shares, comments, however you engage, or if you just show up to listen. Hey man, there's all sorts of people that I just show up to listen, and we appreciate that as well. So thank you guys for everything. We'll be back in a couple more weeks. We will see you then. Bye-bye.